Welcome to the Exile Academy, Path to Legends series. Time flies, and the first season is already coming to an end. In this episode, we'll witness legendary builds and see how the top exiles forged their dominance in Season 1. I'll start with the history of this build, then break down its mechanics, and finally evaluate its performance across key metrics. Let's dive in. 3. Frostfire, Dragon's Fury. 3 Dragons, Explosive Shot. This build was originally developed by an Austrian YouTuber named Palsteron, who created the Deadeye Ranger version. Later, a well-known Chinese PoE streamer, KSC Xiaobo, improved this build and ultimately developed a Witchhunter version of 3 Dragons Explosive Shot. The emergence of this build was like a dragon's breath sweeping through Path of Exile 2, bringing hope to Witchhunter players who had hit a bottleneck and preserving the last glory of Witchhunters. First, why is this build called 3 Dragons Explosive Shot? Because it must equip a unique item, the 3 Dragons Solid Mask. The most important feature of this helmet is that it makes fire damage shock, cold damage ignite, and lightning damage freeze. What's special about this mechanic? Let's look at Explosive Shot first. Explosive Shot is a ranged attack skill that deals fire damage and normally ignites enemies. But due to the 3 Dragons effect, it now shocks enemies instead. What's the interaction with shocking? The answer is Herald of Thunder. Its effect is, when active, killing shocked enemies with attacks will make subsequent attacks release lightning strikes, dealing lightning damage to all nearby enemies. So when Herald of Thunder is active, Explosive Shot that can shock will trigger lightning strikes after killing enemies. But that's not all. In this cycle, Explosive Shot gains lightning strike effects and deals massive lightning damage. But again, due to the 3 dragons, what would normally shock now freezes instead. Now look at Herald of Ice's effect. When active, shattering enemies triggers frost explosions, dealing attack damage to nearby enemies, with 100% of physical damage converted to cold damage. Shattering means killing frozen enemies. With 3 Dragons Rain and Herald of Thunder, Explosive Shot can use lightning damage to freeze enemies, thus triggering Herald of Ice's Shatter Explosions. Then there's Herald of Ash. Its trigger is more direct. When active, dealing sufficient overkill damage with attacks causes explosions that ignite nearby enemies based on overkill damage. As mentioned earlier, both lightning strikes and frost explosions, even Explosive Shot itself, are attack damage. So any of these dealing overkill damage will naturally trigger Herald of Ash's Ignite explosions. Therefore, this build's principle is, through the 3 Dragons mechanics, any fire damage attack can perfectly trigger all 3 Elemental Heralds' additional effects. Other variants like Deadeye Ranger's 3 Heralds Explosive Shot or Titan Warrior's 3 Heralds Flamehammer can use this principle. But Witchhunter's Explosive Shot has wider attack and explosion range, making it the optimal choice for this build. Now, let's evaluate this build's final ratings. Cost. The core equipment is mainly the 3 Dragons helmet. Key desired modifiers are physical damage and base attributes. 3 Dragons Rain is very cheap, costing about 1 Exalted Orb in market. Compared to other weapon types, high damage crossbows are relatively affordable. However, high base attribute gear is currently expensive, since it needs to run 3 heralds and scale damage through attributes. High base stats are needed for maximum potential. Overall, without pursuing extreme optimization, the build is very budget-friendly. Cost rating, 4.8 out of 5. Strength. According to Ep.2 Ninja, the highest level player using this build in Standard is level 98. EHP, Effective Health Pool, is 11k. Single skill DPS reaches 78k, but considering the mixed effects, actual combined DPS likely exceeds 100k. As a pure offensive build, survivability is somewhat lacking, but damage output is impressive. Power rating, 4.2 out of 5. 3. Uniqueness, PoE.2. Scout data shows only 1% of top 1,000 players chose Witchhunter, ranking 3rd lowest among all ascendancies. 3 Dragons Explosive Shot specifically chose the relatively weak Witchhunter this season, preserved its last glory, and gave new purpose to the previously worthless The Three Dragons helmet. In a way, this build truly turned overlooked resources into treasures through game knowledge. Uniqueness rating, 4.9 out of 5. 4. Practicality. Since core items are cheap, progression is smooth. With limited resources, just getting the 3 dragons and a decent crossbow can get it running. Improving ceiling just requires better crossbow and attributes. In combat, the triple herald chain explosions are visually spectacular and provide excellent AoE clearing. The playstyle is straightforward and efficient. If you like shotgun gameplay in FPS games, you'll love how one shot can wipe half the screen. The only weakness is that since it relies on killing afflicted enemies to trigger chain explosions, single target damage against bosses is lacking. Current solution is switching to shock burst rounds for single target. Overall practicality rating, 4.5 out of 5. Value, averaging cost, strength, uniqueness, and practicality scores gives final value rating of 4.6 out of 5. That concludes this Path to Legends episode. For more build recommendations, remember to subscribe and follow us. See you next time.